Another session of the Sisters in Therapy podcast. Today we're talking about effective communication, which we could use a lot of practice at, me and Takesha.
You sure could. Maybe active listening. That's a really important part of communication.
Anyway,
but we're going to get into that.
Okay. So effective communication is the title of this session. Takesha, you're going to start us off.
Am I?
Yes,
You
she's
got a
communicating
definition for
that
us?
you're
Give us a
starting it off.
definition.
Effective communication is the process of exchanging information in a way that ensures the message is clearly understood by all parties involved.
That's key word. All parties involved.
The key word there is that it's clearly understood, which means it has to be clearly stated.
Okay,
Ooh.
and sometimes things are clearly stated, but there's a piece that's called active listening, which means that we pause our own thoughts and really tune in to what the other person is saying so that we can receive their message. Communication is a two-part dance that both people have to be active and intentional with.
And the person has to be comfortable with people seeking clarity.
Listener, if you're not picking up, there was some communication happening before that was
Ineffective.
potentially on both ends.
Not true.
She does no wrong.
Oh my gosh.
Anyways, so yes.
All right. So
Yes.
to start us off, tell me, ladies, what ways have you learned to communicate, or what have you learned about yourself and the way you communicate over the years, and how has it changed?
Well, that's a good question. I think I consider myself to be sort of.
Why your eye rolling? Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. You consider yourself a what?
I think I'm observant. And so, like, the way because I consider myself to be sort of observant, I try to be intentional with how I communicate. That way, I'm not perfect in any way in how I do it, but I try to make sure I heard every part. That way, what I say in response is also clear. Now, I can't do nothing for a person not understanding me, but I try to do my best to understand what a person is trying to say, if that makes any sense. So,
Makes perfect sense.
but I will say, like, in the past, like, hard conversations used to be hard for me, just because, like, I didn't want there to be rifts in conversations. But I'm a I like to feel understood, and I want the other person to feel understood. So, like, that's usually my premise now. But it's just something that I've had to learn, that even in communicating, sometimes there's just hard conversations. It doesn't mean it's the ending of a relationship or anything. It's just sometimes things are hard, but as long as we do it with kindness, I think
I agree.
things can be resolved in that way. So that's been my journey. Dr. MJ, what's been your journey?
I am a blunt communicator, and I have learned that I have to select my words very carefully because they can either help or hinder the cause, which is communication. But also, even when you try to change the way you communicate, like I have as a black woman, it still often get met with something because I'm often saying things that people typically just go unaddressed. I'm going to address it. And yeah, I'm still working on it. It's still a work in progress for me.
Dr. TK, what's been your journey?
Similar to you, Britt, but mine was not necessarily just about all difficult conversations. I used to have a hard time, I think, being vulnerable and expressing how I felt in general. I think I've always been pretty empathetic and understanding of where other people are coming from, and I think sometimes that would override how I felt, or maybe I felt like there wasn't always space for how I felt, or maybe there wasn't time or place, or because I understood them so much,
That's good.
I wouldn't say how I felt.
That's good.
So I've had to learn that by respecting what they have to say and having empathy for it doesn't mean that that should come at the cost of also how I feel. So I try to listen more and clear my mind and be super present and try to tune into everything that the person is saying, and then listening to listen and not listening to respond.
Yeah. I'm glad that you brought up that point about, like, you've understood a person so much that you didn't feel the space or didn't feel understood in those spaces. So, like, how did that change for you? Did you start speaking up more? Because I feel like I relate to that.
I do feel like I speak up more now. I feel like it was hard, and I feel like it came to not like a breaking point, but it almost felt like I was going to keep getting hurt, or I was going to keep not getting my point across, or keep not being heard. And then that just felt like kind of hurt after hurt of me trying to grow and change for another person's benefit, or so that they can feel safe in our communication, and I wasn't doing my part in giving them the information they needed to make it a safe space for me to communicate as well.
I see. That's a good point.
And so I did have to learn to speak up more. I think it's still something that I actively work on, and it's still something that I struggle with. So if it's usually like not received well or something like that, it can cause me to still like pause quite a bit. But I do speak slower sometimes because I am trying to be very, very careful with my words because words matter.
Yeah.
I think tone matters.
Yeah.
Again, I don't always get it right either, but
Yeah, I don't think anybody does, but at least there's still like an intent to get some type of understanding. Because conversations aren't going to be easy either way, but as long as the premise is like we can move with love in this interaction, then at the end of the day we'll be okay. It's just right now we just not, and that's okay.
right. And so that was going to be one of my questions for y'all is like, how did you begin? Because everybody pretty much said that ways that they're trying to make changes toward their moving, like, or the way that they communicate. The way that I tried to make that change was a really like a prayer, a mindfulness practice of literally every day talking about like speak out of love. You get to speak, but speak out of love, speak out of love, trying to make everything. And again, it done fell off because I done stopped being as intentional about it. It's also let you know that you got to keep practicing, or you might just it might just slip on by. But that's something that I had to do to be more intentional about the way that I communicate. How did you guys go about, like, what was the skill or what was the behavior that you started, I guess, doing or being more intentional about to start making the changes in your communication?
So you got anything?
Thinking before I speak and not letting things just roll off my tongue, or just being mindful of the way that I say the hard things or the offense that I've taken, pointing it out, just being mindful of how I point it out.
Yeah, I think is saying things in the moment. Because sometimes I can easily shut down because I'm trying to process and I get torn between, am I about to go off or do I need to chill? So sometimes I'll find myself shutting down and I'm like just over the conversation. Like I don't even want to talk about it anymore. But I've gotten better, at least still learning to say things in the moment. That way it's not a pileup. Because I was meeting with my therapist and she said something like, well, who's keeping score? And I was like, oh, you got me there, girlfriend. You're right. I have to be better at just saying the thing in the moment. That way it's not a pileup, right? So, because this person is not asking me to make sacrifices of myself just because. I chose to do that to avoid conflict in a way, right? So, like, that's why she was like, well, who's keeping score? Like, you took this route. So just getting better at saying things in the moment. And even in the moment, it ends up not being that deep half the time if I just say whatever the thing is.
If it's a person that is emotionally intelligent enough to receive what you have to say.
For sure.
It can ruin relationships, though, when you point things out to people. But also, if you don't say it in the moment or you don't say it at all, it can make you sick. I'm a firm believer that it can make you sick by biting your tongue and not saying the things that you need to say.
Right.
I think research, didn't something come out about that making people sick? Black women specifically?
Yep, I just seen it the other day.
But I've been saying
The
that for
silence is slowly
years,
killing you.
that if you keep on holding things in and not saying things to people to keep the peace, you're going to be at war with yourself and you disrupting all your organs and your health. You're just going to get sick. Just keep holding all this stuff in.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a disruptor of your peace.
Yeah. It
Not
definitely
communicating.
is. Definitely can be.
Okay. So how does communication difficulties show up in your therapy room?
Very often.
Like, what are some of the things that they talk about? What do they struggle with? when
I
it
think
comes
the
to
immediate, the default for a lot of, they're people pleasers. So, like, they'll either say just enough or nothing at all to avoid any type of a negative interaction, really. Or they're conflict avoidant altogether. So there's a constant difficulty to say how they feel, or I don't want to hurt this person's feelings, so I'm just not going to say anything. Well, which I usually say, well, I don't think we can avoid that. The hope is that whatever you feel is necessary to communicate, you still do that in a way that still nurtures the relationship. But a lot of my clients have admitted to being people pleasers and conflict avoidant. So the practice to communicate just hasn't been fostered well enough for them to have confidence in their ability to do it, if that makes sense.
Well, that's kind of like they're
just not practice.
they're not communicating their needs to the people in their life,
For
which
sure.
is a communication issue. But also, they they do say, like, I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, but one thing I heard the most is them coming into therapy and talking about how it's not a big deal. And then I have to point out to them, we just spent 45 minutes talking about it.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
it is a big deal, but it's
and
not
it's
a big
okay that
deal.
it
Yes,
is.
it is, because you just spent your whole session talking about this thing that you say is not a big deal.
Right.
Why do you think that they try to convince, because it's almost like they're trying to convince themselves that it's not a big deal. Why might we do that?
Because it's easier to just say it's not a big deal. Like, I feel like it's easier to just like try to lie to yourself and keep the peace.
Yes, I was gonna say that. Plus, like we learn to sort of gaslight ourselves. So, like, if we say that it's an issue, now we feel compelled to address it. And so, because they've gotten good at avoiding, if I say it's not that big of a deal, that means I could just sweep it under the rug.
That's our first line of kind of action, is to sweep something under the rug. That's culturally what we do. We don't talk about things. We just act like they didn't happen.
Not just that, I tell my people all the time, whenever we try to act like it isn't a big deal, I feel like that's us trying to have control over the situation. Because if I say it's not that big of a deal, or if I say it's me that's tripping, then I have control over those things. If I pose this to somebody, now I have no control over the outcome. This person can still choose to hurt me. They can choose to not receive it. And that feels unstable,
Scary.
unsteady, very scary. But if I just make it about me, and if it's always my fault, or if it's not that big of a deal, then I get to control it.
So you're saying it's a control issue?
I could see that.
I
It's
see that as
safe.
anxious.
It's anxious, but it's safe.
Okay, I can see how that can
Perceived
be controlled.
safety.
Perceived safety.
Perceived safety.
But that perceived safety is so dangerous. Oh my God,
Oh,
I'm just reading
absolutely.
about that
Girl.
in all types of relationships. Another
Yes.
subject.
Always.
But you're right about, like, I guess, control. But it makes sense because you don't know how people are going to respond to you communicating certain things with them. We've all probably experienced how you try to point out something to somebody and it just doesn't go well.
Yeah.
So but that's also a way to weed people out of your life.
But they don't want, I think that's a
don't
part
want
of
to.
the fear, is that this person might decide to do nothing about it, or they might say that they don't care.
Yeah.
And then the ball is still in my court. Then I have to make the decision to stay, and people don't want to stay knowing that this person has actively said that they're okay with hurting me.
Right.
That's a tough one.
And it's one of those things you'll cross that bridge when you get there. But, like, if you've gotten too good at being selective on when you communicate and when you don't, you've not really cultivated any skills on being consistent in the way that you communicate.
Well, then communication is such a big part of self-honor. And so the act of not communicating your needs or pointing out to people that they hurt you, I tell my clients that it's self-betrayal.
Yeah.
Because if you're just sacrificing the relationship for your own self and you're not even getting your needs met or pointing out how somebody has hurt you or, done something that you taken offense to, then you betraying yourself for the relationship.
Because they always say, well, what if they're offended? I'm like, well, how do you feel right now?
Right.
Offended? Okay, well, they can join you in that, and y'all can work through that together. Like,
Right.
I don't want to make them mad. How do you feel? Mad? Oh, okay. Aren't
Right.
you dealing with yours?
What makes you
Aren't you trying to
different?
be constructive with it?
Yeah.
Why do they deserve a break from that feeling without having to address it while you sit up here and hold the burden of it?
But your theory is that it's about control, which I do like that theory. Then my theory would be that we're just so used to self-betrayal and putting ourselves second or last, or just not honoring ourselves in these spaces altogether.
But you said historically, especially in the Black community, that is not uncommon. And I think that goes back to childhood. I hear a lot of my women say, these are spaces as a kid that you're seen and not heard, or
Oh, yeah,
don't
that's-
be crying about that. I'll give you something to cry about, or concern, you got a roof over your head. Like, you don't get to have
A voice.
many needs
Yeah.
outside of your basic needs. So to ask for attention or quality time is like damn near absurd.
When I'm working with families specifically, like when I'm working with fathers and their children in therapy, I am always asking the fathers to just kind of think about the type of world that he would like his children to live in regards to, like, what would you want them to do in this situation? 20 years later, he'll say, like, I want them to use their voice and to speak up. And I have to point out to them, but then this is the practice. Because you're an authoritarian figure.
Exactly.
They get to practice this with you. And it's always like, they like, oh, my God. But
It's
really
like
like
they
a
don't think about it
revelation.
that
Yeah,
way.
they don't
It
think about
really
it
is a
that way.
revelation.
Yeah.
And so I say this to my fathers all the time, because sometimes they are so protective to the fact that they are not leaving space for the children to use their voice.
Right.
And this was specifically with some of my Hispanic families in regards to kids not wanting to confirm in regards to their Catholic religion and things like that, and just being able to use their voice to kind of express how they feel about it. Not because the kids love their parents so much that they want to do this thing to make you proud, but also give them space to say, well, I would rather maybe go hang out with my friends than to do this. And so this is just community. This form of communication is like a feedback loop. You tell them why this is important to you, then they get to tell you why, like, I want to do this to make you proud, but also I really am a little bit annoyed that I got to do this.
Right.
Just leaving a space open for
Right.
self-expression.
Yeah. Giving them some flexibility.
Flexibility to use their voice.
To use
I was
their
about to
voice,
say,
yeah.
that's how you grow independent thinkers.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we don't nurture that because it's uncomfortable for us, or we
Mm-hmm.
just want them to listen to us. But you're right, this is the practice. And if they
Mm-hmm.
don't learn now, but also a lot of times whenever kids are teenagers or whenever they're adults, they're looking at the kids crazy, like, why don't you know how to do this? Why aren't
Yes.
you doing this?
Yes.
Why would they know?
Why would they
They
know?
have never been taught to do anything different.
Yes.
Why isn't there a pause for saying something like that as a parent?
Saying what?
Why don't they know how to do this? Why isn't there like a moment, okay, did I give them the skills? Why is it immediately, why don't you know how to do this?
I mean, my theory is that people don't understand brain development.
Okay, that's fair.
And how it works in regards to shaping a child's ability to communicate, and also their reasoning behind certain things. A 16-year-old teenager would rather hang out with their friends
Right.
than probably go to church.
Right.
Doesn't mean that they are anti-religion. That's just their age, their development at this
Exactly.
stage. So just having conversations about why this is so important to us as our values as a family could be, helpful for them, saying, okay, yeah, I'll do it. My whole point is like, I'm not trying to steer the child to do anything. I'm trying to get you guys to just talk about why this is
Exactly.
important to the family.
Right.
They're not saying why it's important. They're just saying, you're going to do this because I said so.
Right.
Yeah,
That's
no.
not effective communication.
It's not.
And then you're going to make them do it, and then they are going to go away from religion. You're doing
Yes.
I tell people all the time, you're doing the opposite. In trying to do this or be stern
The-
in this way or
yes.
go this, you're going to get the opposite effect or
Yes.
reaction.
100%.
Yes.
Kids want to make their parents proud.
Absolutely.
And so if you talk about like why this is important to me as a parent, which would make them be a little bit vulnerable, versus coming from this stance, you're going to do it because I said so, you leaving no room for communication for neither one of
No.
you guys to kind of explore this new thing that you're presenting to your family.
And you're already putting a strain on the relationship that the kid can't come to you about things.
So then they're going to turn away from religion.
Yeah.
And then they're also going to learn or be reinforced that their needs do not matter.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they're going to not communicate them as adults. This is all a very vicious cycle.
Communicating in families is so important.
Mm-hmm.
It's so important. Telling children to do things just because you said so doesn't really work.
No, that's your small world. Your household is a small world.
Mm-hmm.
You're teaching them how to navigate with people, the people around them, the people in the community. So they have to be able to know that they have a voice there. Because also, again, when they get older, you're going to be disappointed if you feel like, oh, my kid is miserable, or they're not happy at their job. They're just doing what their boss says, or they're just, in this field because somebody told them to be. And you're like, where is my... They seem so sad or disappointed. I wish they had a happier life.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to wish something was different. You're going to wonder how we got here.
Yeah. A vicious cycle indeed.
Okay. So, Britt, did you talk about how communication issues show up in your
I think
therapy
so.
room?
Did I? I mean, it's essentially the same as y'all's. Yeah, I did. I think I did. I
Okay.
think I had mentioned the people pleasing, avoiding conflict.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did.
Okay. So, for me, what I usually see is people not knowing what their needs are or
Yeah,
what they
that.
want. And
Yeah.
so then we get back in this loop of, oh, people that I love should just know, or why don't they just know? You don't even know. They're like, I don't know why they didn't just do that. Okay, well, what would you have preferred for them to do?
Exactly.
Well, I don't know. If you don't know,
Then how would they know?
how would they know?
Exactly.
So again, whenever you're communicating with others, still a big part of healthy, effective communication is knowing where you stand on things and how you feel about things, being able to take inventory of where you're at and what you're thinking, and be able to find the words for that so that you can communicate them to other people. And a lot of times, like everything else, people just want it to flow.
And
be
how
there.
do you help people get to that point that strategy, because I always use the word like strategies and having your foundation for how you want to handle things. Not saying that's also a thing of control too, though, trying to make sure you control everything. But also it can be a strategy to help you, one, not lose your shit on people or get frustrated with them in the moment, but just knowing like, okay, if this happened, then I'm going to address it like this.
Yes, it's
I do-
very slow. I feel like it's
Yeah.
a slow process.
Yeah.
But it's almost like a role play. If I
Yes.
go back to a situation that they had before of when
Okay.
things did not go well for them. And then we think about, okay, what are some other ways? What are all the possibilities
Right.
of ways that you could have responded? How did you respond? And how would you have preferred to respond?
Right.
Okay, so different hypotheticals.
Different hypotheticals, but
good.
then even whenever they get ready to have a difficult conversation, I say, okay, so what's your ideal outcome? Okay, how will you handle that? But also, what if it doesn't go your way? Because that's always a possibility.
Right.
How do you plan on dealing with that and navigating that?
I do that the most when people are going home for the holidays.
Me too.
Yeah.
That is one of the things, like,
Yep.
because people come to therapy and like, I'm going home for the holidays. I already know such and such gonna say this. I'm trying to keep but I'm like, but also people are saying to me, I don't want to just be silent anymore because it's triggering for them to be silent because they feel like they
Yes.
didn't say anything as children. So as an adult, that's something that I use with them on how to use their voice as an adult while going home for the holidays, but also being respectful.
For sure.
A part of that is, which I try to do as well, is being comfortable with knowing what you want, knowing what you need, and having voice to that. But then also being okay with people not understanding that.
Oh yeah.
People so deeply want to be understood, and we will go back and forth trying to convince someone to understand us.
Because
And-
being understood is a representation of safety.
It
Oh,
is.
of course.
It is.
And and I get it.
Yeah.
And it's important. I also think that sometimes it does more harm than good trying to stay in those spaces and make people understand you.
This is true.
Sometimes it might hurt to walk away. But maybe it's the person, maybe it's the particular conversation or topic, but sometimes you aren't going to be understood. And so knowing that you still have the right to use your voice, and we can legitimately agree to disagree or say,
Absolutely.
okay, well, that's not my perspective, but okay. And you can choose to disengage.
Right.
Because the more and more you engage, the more emotionally dysregulated you're going to become.
This
And the
is
more
true.
triggering it's going to be versus I honored myself, I said what I had to say.
Exactly.
And I can be done with this.
Exactly, because you understand yourself.
And that's all that matters.
And
Like,
that's
how
all that
important
matters.
is it? I get that you want to have safety with this person, but you don't have it in that moment.
Right.
So now it's your responsibility to keep yourself safe.
Yes.
Which means walking away and not staying with an unsafe person trying to convince your kidnapper, oh, but please, I'm a nice person. No, you get to
No.
walk away. Run.
Exactly. And which is why I tell my clients all the time, like, at some point we have to respect people and their limitations.
Yes.
You want this person to be understanding and all of those things, but if they don't have it within them, then it's like beating a dead horse. Yeah.
This is true.
I do think, because I hit on it a minute ago, and Mercedes, you can tell me because you work with couples, I don't like the premise of people should just know.
I don't.
I do think, though, that there are some times that we can be more in tune with our partners.
That's such a slippery slope.
I agree.
Because yes, people do think, and and when I'm pointing out to people that people just don't know, they're like, they knew that.
And they be
Some
right.
shit is obvious. Some
Yeah.
shit is obvious.
And
is.
people be, in the couples room. Some people get mad at me is because I'm like, the therapist in me gonna say this, but yeah, you're
Yeah.
right.
But
They-
you, but
There's
you're right.
something
They
that
should've
person
known.
should
There's some
know.
there's some
There's
sh-
something.
If I have
But-
gotten upset about this 5-6 times,
You know.
or if I am crying while I talk about that's attunement
Yeah.
to
Yes.
your person's natural patterns.
Right.
If they're crying, I'm not gonna go up and be like, "Hey, you ready to get some?" Like, what?
That's wild.
It's such a slippery slope because sometimes people cry as a form of manipulation in relationships,
Oh, of course.
and in not just romantic relationships. I think that sometimes I tell people that sometimes you got to keep saying things over and over again, and sometimes you do. Unfortunately, you do. Is it annoying? Yes.
This is true.
But sometimes you do.
This is true.
fair.
Like I tell people all the time, you're going to have kids who, which is true, but I always feel like that is double-sided as well. You tell kids, get your shoes, take them out of here, take them out of here, take them out of here. Eventually, the mama going to say, get your shoes and get out. So
Right.
you might have to tell somebody over and over again, and that's fine. But while they're being understanding of having to say this thing over and over again, you
Yep.
then also have to be understanding that at some point this person gonna lose their shit. They're going to get
Exactly.
upset because they have to say this over and over
Exactly.
again. So y'all, while y'all both learning, there needs to be grace on both sides.
But the
Correct.
problem with people not remembering what their partners or their children or anybody is saying to them is the fact that we are always so busy. We're not being mindful. People aren't present, so you will forget things, and that's just the truth. Like,
You will
True.
forget things, but I think there's a difference between like forgetting and not paying attention. I think.
but the not paying attention comes from being not present
I was about to say, but
and
again,
not being because you're just stressed throughout the day. I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying people really do be having brain farts.
Yes.
Absolutely.
this is true.
And might be double sided because there's one thing to pass up a brain fart, but it's another thing to be intentionally disregarding.
I was gonna say if you
dismissive.
habitually do it,
Yeah, that's different.
It's a thing.
Yeah,
I get it. It happens. I think we all deserve grace. Of course,
That comes from check-ins, though. I think that can be limited if people checked in.
I agree.
I think those things can be limited.
I agree.
You were specifically talking about couples, right?
Mhm.
I think couples don't make time to check in. I'm guilty of that myself, but it really is a hard thing to do to sit down and try to check in all the time.
What do you
it
think
takes
makes it
time.
hard?
time.
Time management.
Yeah,
How long? Like, what's the ideal check-in for you?
It's so many things to check in about. You got groceries, you got household labor, and you got also check in about emotional stuff. Then you got to check in about sex and finance. It's so much to check in about. It's annoying.
yeah.
Run.
But can you? But can you? Does everything have to be addressed in that one check-in? though?
Right.
No, it doesn't. But I have had partners, I'm not going to gender them today, come in and say, oh my God, it's a check-in about everything. Like, oh, we can't talk about this unless it's a check-in. So that's also, people be finding stuff, girl. But let me
Yeah.
tell you, I say, if you want to talk about it, talk about it. But if your person not in the space to receive what you're saying, you going to be mad. It's going to lead to an argument. Another
Yeah.
thing is people don't want to say, hey, let's talk about such and such. They just want to go in and say, blah, 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 and say it. The
Oof.
person is not ready because they're
Yeah.
not in the mindset. So then
Yeah.
it's so much. And I'm telling you, working with, it's so much to get people to understand that you do have to sometimes say, hey, I would like to talk about what we're going to eat for Friday at 7 p.m. They don't
Do
want
you have space for it right now? No. Well, when might you have space? Okay, let's talk about it then.
Right.
people don't want to do all of that. It takes steps to get sustainability in relationships.
It does. You have-
Especially if you just y'all two and you got a few kids, you ain't got no nanny. It's just y'all. It's a
Well,
lot.
I don't know, man. That's stressing me out.
Exactly.
It is a lot, but relationships are hard.
They are hard.
Nobody said that they were easy.
Right.
Relationships
work.
just take work, but they're worth it in the long
Absolutely.
run.
I think the issue is when one person is carrying more of the emotional load of the relationship.
The
I think it's gonna
emotional
ebb and flow.
load
Yeah.
of the emotional labor in general is really just so much more than the other labor.
Oh, I'm sure.
And one of the interventions that I use as a couples therapist is obviously just getting people to understand the cycles that happens when they're having tough conversations, which would be the 4 horsemen. Because it's not so. One of the things is like you're not going to be perfect as you try to navigate discussions.
Mm-hmm.
But the goal is not for you to be perfect, but to recognize when you are about to have an argument so you can repair.
Yes.
That's
Thank
the
you.
goal. I am not asking
Thank
you
you.
to avoid the arguments. I'm asking you to recognize when they're about to happen so you can catch yourself and repair.
Yes. I'm glad you said that because I think, well, when I'm working with a client who's trying to like be intentional with how they communicate, they have a partner who won't respect the boundary of I need a minute.
Yes.
How do y'all help clients in those situations? Well, for me, I'm like, there's not a better boundary. Like, you can't, that is the boundary. It's just a matter of like, I'm telling you that I need a second.
Then I would say they should go to couples therapy. So the more educated people become about the different communication styles, I think they better able to communicate.
Fair.
So if they were to come see me, I'll point out that the person who need a minute would be the distancer, and the person who want to talk right now is the pursuer. Just educating people on the roles that they have in the communication styles and saying, okay, and once they know that this is their style, that means that unfortunately somebody need ain't gonna get met when it comes to communication. Not in the short term, but in the
Yeah.
long term, everybody needs to get met.
Right.
But in the short term, the person who needs the minute really should get the minute, or
Right.
the communication is not going to be effective.
Correct.
Say, so then you would have to ask the other person, like, what is, I guess, like, uncomfortable with them or difficult for them to
Keep going.
respect the minute.
Oh.
Sometimes they're like, oh, well, I don't want it to be 3 days later.
Fair.
Understandable.
Right.
So really just kind of see what their barriers are for
Yeah.
respecting.
The person who
The minute.
instantly wants to talk about it right away typically have an anxious attachment style.
Yeah. And
Typically.
usually want to like immediately hug after arguing. Like, girl, I need a minute now. I'm pissed. But I mean, like, that is a good point. It is an anxious attachment style. You want to hurry up and make sure that things are okay. But, like,
Yes.
it means things are just not okay right
Right
now.
now.
That's the key point.
But that also, everything is so much rooted in a past experience
Yeah.
that it's almost that we can understand. Like, and then if you get the point inside in therapy, people like, that ain't got nothing to do with this. I'm like, yes,
Yes,
it
it
does.
does,
Swear
babe.
it don't got nothing to do
Yes,
with
it does,
this. And I'm
babe.
like, oh, let me talk. Let's talk about
I'm
it.
like,
Right.
yes, it do. But people just
Connect
swear
the
that
dots.
stuff is
One
not
client
connected.
told me, hang up on you, not in the mood. So, all right, girl.
I love when they do that. They like,
Now I want to hear
oh,
it.
you
It
on
be
your
so
shit
funny.
today.
Yeah.
And then once they recognize what you're doing, they be like,
Yes.
They be mad for real.
I see what you did there. But no, it's really fun. I really tell people like,
Yes.
this really is a skill. I'm telling you, this is not
Yes.
something that
Ain't
you
for
just
the
wake
weak.
up and do. Like, this takes
It
great
does.
skill to be a therapist.
Absolutely.
And to get people to see their communication styles and patterns, but even more so to get them to see where it came from.
Yes, absolutely. Consider the source.
For sure.
Yeah.
Takesha, what's on your mind?
Okay, I was just gonna ask, like, what are some things that you guys usually do with individuals in session to help them develop and maintain healthy communication habits?
I always encourage journaling sometimes when they have a difficulty in outwardly expressing it.
Yes.
I encourage them to start practicing on paper. And even if it has to be like writing bullet points down to even communicate to their partner, like, it's okay if you have to like read off a sheet of paper if it's that difficult
100%.
for you. Yeah.
I do something basically journaling, but I tell my clients to unravel. And unraveling means you're going to just let everything unravel up here. So not like get up every day and journal, but when you feel like, when you have let something slide and you didn't communicate the way you wanted to communicate and you keep thinking about it, unravel. Go to the paper and write down what's on your mind. And sometimes they come back to therapy and we pull out what they should be communicating from their unraveling.
Right.
If that makes sense.
That's a good point.
I agree.
That's good.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing a lot of healthy communication has to do with individual self-exploration of how we feel
Yes.
and what makes
Introspection.
us feel that way. What advice do you give individuals who are trying to help a partner or a child be more comfortable in their communication?
Oh, that's a good question.
I think children and a partner are different.
Of course.
So with children, I would say that you would have to model it
Yes.
first and foremost and give them the language and maybe give them charts of like pictures for emotions to say how I feel this. Kids are very capable of using their I statements.
Yes.
If you start working with children, they can say how they feel. They can tell you what you did
Right.
that made them feel that way.
Right.
You just got to be ready to receive it when they tell you, because kids are very much so can tell
Oh,
you.
yeah.
Yes.
The problem is when people don't give kids the space to do that.
Right.
But if you give them the space to do it, kids will tell you how you make them feel.
Right.
Big emotions, little emotions. I say modeling it for children. Also, I ain't even gonna lie. I even tell people you have to model it for your partners.
I was just about to say that.
I'm gonna say, I tell you gotta do that too.
I tell
'Cause
them
I
all the
actually-
time. Sometimes you have to model the change that you want to see, really. And a big part of, a lot of times I try to help clients tell their partner how their behavior translated to them.
Yes.
Right? Like, you saying this is how it translated to me. Is that what you want me to feel? That way, the hope is that it disarms both of them in that moment. Because sometimes when you dig a little bit, like if you tell a person like specifically how they've affected you, the hope is that they'll pause and be like, dang, I don't want her to feel like I'm neglecting her.
I agree because, for example, I feel like there's a lot of times when we say something abrasive or mean or rude and another person matches us back in that same language, like, damn, why you come at me like that? Like, and you match back with the exact same energy. At that point, both people are defensive, arms are up. You're both about to start just kind of defending yourselves versus if somebody come at you wild and you don't match that energy, and you say, hey, that didn't really feel good when you
Right.
said that, I'm going to be a lot more likely to say, damn, I'm sorry, that was not
Yes.
my intention, because I don't want to hurt you.
Right.
But if you come at me wild and all of a sudden,
Right.
then we might have a problem, because I'm probably
Exactly.
going to come back. I don't
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 do that.
always have the type of awareness to when somebody comes at me that way to not be on guard.
Yeah.
And that's something that
fair.
I do with my couples, where I have to say, unfortunately, because unfortunately, one of you are going to always have to be the leaders at some. The leadership is going to change at any given time.
Yeah.
For the sake of us working together as a team to make this relationship healthier, because that's what they came here for. When you see your partner going here or coming at you with contempt, because that's what that is, I need you to not match their energy.
Right.
That's you being the leader at this time. That person can immediately begin repair because they recognize you being the leader. That's the approach that I take as well.
Yeah,
That
that's
is
good.
not easy, because some people don't want to have to always go high
Exactly.
while the other person is going low. But that's when I
Exactly.
say, okay, ego has no place here.
Right.
You want the relationship to work or you don't? Oh, forgot about that. You want the
We're
relationship
gonna keep going.
You want the relationship to work or you don't want the relationship to work.
Exactly. Exactly.
But it can't happen too many times, or we have to have a conversation with the other person, because we would have
Yeah.
to revamp the whole treatment plan.
Yep.
Agreed.
Yep.
Something that I did with my past partner, and I felt like it worked very well with us, was really kind of creating a space that we can safely have these kind of conversations, and that when one of us got loud, we already said it up front of like, hey, if I get loud, or if I get a way that you don't feel like it's safe for us to talk anymore, please let me know in the middle of the argument, because I don't want to talk to you like that. I don't want you to
Exactly.
feel that way. Like, I'm giving you permission
Right.
to please gently, but I do say please gently stop me in that moment and say, hey,
Right.
you get loud. And so we were, after that conversation, and he agreed to do the same thing, we were both able to be like, hey,
Yeah.
you kind of raising your voice right now. And it tended to work out pretty well for the most part.
I usually tell my clients sometimes it's okay to have a safe word. Like, how do we, like, talking to each other about how do we fairly have these type of disagreements?
And I think that that's important, because like you
That
said,
is
Mercedes,
important.
we're not going to the goal isn't to not argue. You're going to have
Yeah.
disagreements.
You
You're going
will.
to have
Yes.
arguments. So it really is about how do you prepare
Yes.
ahead of time for the repair.
Exactly.
How do you create
Exactly.
a space that says, I can gently call you out, or hey,
Right.
we need to step away.
Because that safety is not the absence of arguments. It's
Yeah.
that
Ooh,
is
that's
safety.
good. That's good.
That's safety is saying that we may get a little loud, but one of us at any given time is going to recognize it, and we're not going to match it. That's what I'm trying to get people to understand. That I ain't going to sit here and act like that stuff is easy. That stuff is hard.
It
It is hard, but I think you got to give people permission.
You do. I like the approach
call
that you
you
and
out.
your partner used to use. I need to try that for myself.
I was gonna say, and
I
it's
talk
hard
loud
to
in
hear.
general. I'm
it's hard to
passionate.
hear in the moment, but I am like, okay, like again, I don't want to
Yeah.
hurt you. I'm not trying to be this way. I do
Right.
want this to be constructive. So it really kind of does what I was talking about initially, and kind of grounds me back into a place of love and healthy
Yes.
communication
That's
versus
it.
I just want to be heard, or it needs to
Yeah.
go my way. It
Okay.
really is about the relationship that's centered, and not just me
Right.
or my needs, or him and his needs.
Exactly.
So, I guess at the root of this, we're talking about effective communication, but we're also talking about safety in communication.
absolutely.
And we kind of got some pillars going here: families, and then like partners. And with families, we kind of established that a part of the communication is letting children be able to use their voice.
Yes.
And then with partners, we're kind of saying like, okay, this ain't gonna be perfect. Somebody may get loud, but a intervention you can use is like to gently say, hey, you're getting loud.
Right.
Kind of preface at the beginning of the discussion that if one of us get loud, we have the right to say, hey, you're getting loud.
Right.
Because that's actually really good. That's how you sustain safety
Yes.
while having an intense conversation.
And patience
And
too.
patience.
Because if you had that conversation at the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
not that you're anticipating an argument, but like we talked about, it happens.
It does happen.
If it's in the moment and somebody's getting loud, that person can say, "Okay, remember, this is where it's escalating.
You gave me permission.
You gave me permission
Yeah.
to say, let's pause for a second. Can we agree that we are pausing in this moment? If you got to set a timer, set a timer."
Yes.
And it's probably going to be more constructive that way.
Yeah.
Because usually when we both
Yes.
go back to yelling, we just, at that point, both probably just
Because
trying
then
to be
what are
heard.
we talking about?
But the things that we're saying, like, these are great interventions. The challenge is when people think that they don't have to do this.
Yeah.
That it's
Practice
just
that's
supposed to
uncomfortable or
happen.
Right.
We're just supposed to know how to communicate. That does not work like that.
No.
There is a reason why divorce is up.
Yeah.
It ain't always infidelity
No,
at all.
not at all.
All right.
Communication is definitely important.
It's
in all,
important.
in all relationships, really.
Our relationships, and also just knowing that you it's okay for you to take some time and go sit with yourself before addressing
Yes.
a intense conversation with your children, with your boss, with your parents, with your husband, with your wife. You can just take your time with your friends. It's okay to sit with it for a while
Right.
before going and bring it to the forefront. It really is. It may be even better to sit with it.
Oh yeah, that's some nice closing advice. I agree.
Yeah.
Bridget, you got any for us? Any takeaways?
No, not really. I think that I agree with what Mercedes said. Certainly, introspection is a big part of
Yes.
knowing how you want to do it, when you want to do it, and just to clear your mind.
And that you want to do it. I know that's what I would encourage as well, just because a lot of times I feel like sometimes we don't even know why we felt what we felt. Was it really the person's words?
Yeah.
Was it
Yeah.
because I was already in a mood?
Yeah.
And don't get caught just going off on something just because you had a bad day. Sometimes we really do need to sit with ourselves and assess, is this even something worth
Yeah.
bringing up?
I have found that very helpful for me personally, just sitting with something for a second. Because after I have taken offense to something or something has made me feel away, that's probably the biggest change I've had in my communication style is sitting with stuff before immediately saying something. Because I would immediately say something
And
previously.
even with you pausing, your feelings could still be valid. Like that person
Right.
could have hurt your feelings or pissed you off, but you're being intentional about how you want that to be understood.
It makes me respond less out of anger and more so out of I'm honoring myself by saying, hey, I don't like the way you
Right.
did that. Versus coming from a place like, you got me booked up.
Right. Yeah. Because you might have her fucked
I
up.
was
Might.
about to say, sometimes.
Takesha be having me booked up.
And she clearly communicated that to her friend. And on that note,
Go love yourself.
go love yourself.
Go love yourself.